Senior Professor Padmalal Manage, Vice Chancellor of the University of Sri Jawatanapura, Professor Manori Gamage, Dean of the Faculty of Medical Sciences, Professor Guwani Liyanage, Chairperson, Research Committee, and other office bearers, including Dr. Nilanka Perera, Secretary, Deans of other faculties, Deans from other universities, faculty members, and other invitees, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank the Research Committee of the Medical Faculty of University of Sri Jawatanapura for inviting me to this international conference on medical sciences as the guest of honor and inviting me to speak at this inauguration. Thank you very much. And the topic given to me was challenges faced by the higher education sector and its future direction. I would think a relevant topic to an audience comprised of people like you all. But here I must say at the very outset, I am not an insider, I am not an academic, so I'm going to take an outsider's perspective, looking at the higher education sector in Sri Lanka, comparing it with some of the other peer countries as well, looking to see where things are today and where things can improve going forward. So it is from that perspective I will be making this presentation, and sometimes you may agree with me on certain matters, sometimes you may not, but that's fine, right? Because the idea is to share some thoughts. So let me start off as an economist looking at the importance of higher education to the economy. First of all, from an overall sense. So first, if you look at the current economy that we have here today in Sri Lanka as well as in the rest of the world, it's a knowledge-intensive economy, which needs people with certain knowledge and skills that are required to drive key sectors of the economy. We need people with the ability to carry out technology transfers and technological innovation. We need people who can make decisions supported by data-driven analysis, something that is significantly lacking today because often we find ad hoc decisions being made both in the public sector and in the private sector as well. And also we talked about the importance of artificial intelligence. So we need people to be developed by the higher education system with these capabilities to be able to make a significant contribution to the economy. And also the availability of higher education opportunities to a larger number of qualified persons at an affordable cost is very important because that will help to stem the brain drain. Because as you know, one of the biggest issues we are facing today is the brain drain because, and one of the significant factors influencing that brain drain is the lack of opportunities for higher education. And this affects two groups. One is the youth who are looking for higher education opportunities, those who are in the 20 to 30 age group, and then also people, more mature professionals in the age group of say 45 to 60 who are concerned about higher education opportunities for their children. So both these groups, there's a better chance of retaining them within the country if we can expand the number of higher education opportunities in the country. And also, I mean, research has proven that there are many social benefits. The better the standard of higher education in a country, you can expect better improved health levels, life expectancy, a reduction in gender disparities in earnings capacity. It has been shown very clearly that as more females are educated, the income gap between males and females tend to narrow. At the graduate level, it is less. At the postgraduate level, it is even less. So the better educated the females are, the gender disparity tends to reduce. So this has been proven by studies. And also you can see a clear correlation between the level of governance in a society. Better democracy, political stability, lower crime, all these things are associated with overall standard of higher education. And a reduction in inequalities in income and wealth distribution, as long as you have opportunities for people, even from the lower income groups, to come in and improve their living standards by gaining a high education, then the opportunities to reduce these inequalities will be more. So these are some of the benefits to an economy. And also, when you are competing to attract investments to a country, one of the key factors would be the attractiveness that you can provide by having an adequate pool of talent in the country. So when a foreign investor is looking at maybe several countries as possible destinations for investment, one of the key factors, beyond most other factors, more than maybe tax incentives, more than maybe climate and other factors, one of the key influencing factors would be the quality of human resources that you can get in that country. And also, specifically when it comes to medical education, I mean, today we are facing many challenges on the healthcare side, the rapidly aging population, the increase in poverty as a result of the recent economic crisis, creating major challenges in public health delivery, and the significant increase in NCDs, mental health issues. So all these are creating a greater demand for doctors and other healthcare workers. So the higher education system has to deliver a greater output in order to meet these needs that we are going to face from the healthcare side. So I think it's very clear, I'm sure to all of you, the importance of higher education in advancing an economy. So let's see what are the challenges that we face in the higher education sector in Sri Lanka. The biggest issue relates to access, the limited access that people have to get into the higher education system due to a number of reasons. The limited intake of public universities, the inability to afford privately funded higher education, although we have today some form of private higher education available, the low public acceptance. Though there are private higher education institutions, most of them are not linked to internationally reputed institutions. So there is a reluctance on the part of students and the parents to go into some of these private sector higher education institutions, and also the lack of acceptance by the government, lack of accreditation, that is also turning away potential students from going into the private sector. And also the non-availability of some critical fields of study, such as medicine, within the non-state higher educational institutional sector. So if somebody wants to do medicine, then you got to get into one of the 11 state medical faculties, or I believe there's one more, the KDU. But beyond that, there is nothing available that the private sector can offer in Sri Lanka. So what choice do they have? The only option being to go overseas, but that again is not something that everybody can afford. So what is the result? The result is a gross enrollment rate of around 20%, right? So which is something very much lower than most peer countries. I will describe a few other countries from the Asian region where we can see at what points they are in relation to the gross enrollment rate, which is basically a measure that shows how many within the age group of people who are qualified, who are eligible to enter higher education, how many of them actually get into the higher education system. So if you look at the numbers, basically if you take 2021-22, there were 171,500 students who qualified for undergraduate studies after sitting for the A-level exam. Of them, 25% only, just a quarter, got admitted to public universities. I couldn't get official figures, but from a number of sources, I was able to put together some numbers, which I would consider as rough estimates, but roughly about 30,000 students leave for overseas higher education every year. So that's about 17.5%. Another about 20,000 enter private higher education institutions, not only those which are recognized by the Ministry of Higher Education, but overall, all the private sector institutions that we have in the country. So when you take all of that, still it accounts for something like 54.5%. What about the balance? So there is about another 45.5% who actually are eligible for higher education, but they cannot enter a state institution nor a private institution, nor can they go overseas. So many of them probably end up in vocational training institutions, etc., which is not bad, but these are people who are qualified to undertake undergraduate studies. So obviously, even if they move into something else, they are going with some degree of discontent, right? Because that's obviously not their preferred choice. So what can we do about this? So let's see as we go along. Access is one issue, but quality and relevance within our higher education sector, these are areas we need to question. I'm talking as an outsider, looking at the entire sector, not only your university, but across the board, when you look at it in comparison with the rest of the world. For instance, if you take the state universities, our global rankings are very low. We have to admit. Not a single Sri Lankan university is within the top 1,000, either in the Times rankings or the QS rankings, which are the recognized international rankings. Whereas many from our neighboring countries are within those lists. One of the reasons contributing to that is the imbalanced distribution we have among the fields of study. Now, when you look at all our universities across the board, almost half, about 48% are in arts, management, and commerce, for which there is a lesser demand from industry. And in one study, it has been shown that we had the highest percentage, the highest in the world, of students in humanities and social sciences. Not something we can be proud of, right? I am a product of humanities and social sciences, having studied economics. It's not that there's anything wrong about studying social sciences and humanities, it's just a number. And we are producing far more than what an economy needs, and very much less in other areas. So we have one of the lowest in science and engineering in the whole world. So these are some of the issues that we need to address. And the lack of flexibility with regard to the choice of subjects, where we trap students within silos. You come into physical science, you stay in physical science. You come into commerce, you stay in commerce. Even between related areas, I'm not talking about physical science and medicine, or commerce and something totally different, but even between commerce and arts, the transferability is very low. The ability to take a course from another department, from another faculty, is very low. And the over-reliance on exam-based assessment, something I think we are moving away from, but still, compared to many other countries, this is still an issue. And the prevalence of part-time taught postgraduate degree programs. Every university has got into this, and we have so many programs, masters in arts, MBAs, too many. And most have no research component at all. So these are some of the issues we have in our current public university sector. If you look at the private or the non-state higher educational institutions, most of them are today unregulated. They are registered with the Register of Companies or the Board of Investment. Basically operating as businesses. There is no regulation by an authority, a competent authority, which can regulate an education institution. And majority is not subject to quality assurance or accreditation. Only about 28 recognized degree awarding institutions are there in the non-state sector. And there also I find that some of the institutions have only registered 1 or 2 of their courses, I suppose, just to be on the list. But most of their programs are outside the ambit of these processes. And the state of preparedness of students entering universities and higher education institutions is also something we need to think about, because what comes out is related to what comes in, right? So there is a limit to how much of a transformation you can do to the student who comes in through our education system, who are primarily based on the GCA level results. They are used to rote learning, exam-based assessment, heavy reliance on tuition with low English language and IT competence. So these are issues that have to be tackled at the level of general education reforms, not at the level of higher education, but they are interlinked. So this is something we need to understand. And of course, the inadequate focus on research and innovation, I must qualify by saying that I find at the University of Sri Jayawardenepura, there appears to be a lot of attention and focus on this area under the leadership of Professor Padmalal. I'm very happy to hear of that. But when I look at it from an outside perspective, when we look at the overall higher education system in Sri Lanka, relative to the rest of the world, we find that we are still far behind. Because the priority is given to teaching of undergraduates as well as postgraduates far more than to research. And if you look at certain measures that are standard measures that I'm sure you are familiar with, number of active research as a percentage of total number of academics, number of citable documents, number of patent applications, when we use these kind of measures, Sri Lanka lags way behind most of the peer countries. High graduate unemployment and underemployment, mainly as a result of the excessively large number of arts graduates, in particular external graduates. So this is where the real issue is. There are far too many external graduates coming out with arts degrees, and these are the people who actually are mostly unemployed or underemployed. So that's an area we need to look at. And the brain drain, particularly affecting the faculty, where it is important to maintain a student-teacher ratio at a reasonable level. Even currently it's high, but even to keep it there, you have to address the brain drain. The poor quality of physical infrastructure, especially aspects relating to student welfare, inadequate use of technology, these areas are improving. I can see in some of the universities, I'm a little familiar with the University of Colombo, where I sometimes do a few lectures as a visiting lecturer, and I'm sure in your university, these are improving, but across the board, still it's not at the optimum level. And collaboration, the Vice Chancellor spoke a lot about collaboration, but there again, there is some progress being made, but yet inadequate, particularly when it comes to collaboration between the universities and other stakeholders. So this is where we are today, and let's see how some of the other countries in the region have dealt with some of these issues by bringing in more private sector participation into their higher education sectors, and how that has helped these countries to get to a higher level of student enrollment and to deal with some of the issues that I have been talking about. So let's start with India, our closest neighbor. They have over 400 private universities, accounting for 26% of student enrollments, over 42,000 affiliated colleges that are linked to 500 public universities. So basically these affiliated colleges, they teach the same curriculum that the public universities provide. But India being a very large country, so people go into these colleges and study the public university curriculum, and 65% of these are owned by the private sector. So when you add up the two, the private universities and the private-owned affiliated colleges, 56% of student enrollments are now within the private sector. That is more than one half. And the important thing is they maintain a level playing field by having both public and private sector higher education institutions regulated by the UGC. So the same regulator governs both sectors. And interestingly, the first private university established under state law, they have to set up under the laws of the state in which they locate, happened to be the Sikkim Manipal University of Health, Medical and Technological Sciences, a medical school. So they started with medicine, though we seem to have a problem in getting there yet. And there are other private universities, such as the Amity University, which has over 175,000 students, one of the largest private universities in India. Where have they gone with these developments? Their gross enrollment ratio, which was quite low at one time, given the large size of the population, has now gone up to 28.4%. So they are ahead of us, in spite of being a much larger country. And their new education policy introduced in 2020 brought about significant deregulation and liberalization. Some of the new measures introduced being measures that cross traditional boundaries between subject clusters, ease of switching fields of study, some of the problems we talked about, continuous and multidimensional forms of assessment, and foreign universities have been allowed to open branch universities in India. But there are problems. There are some areas which need improvement. One of the things being that there is a significant disparity in quality. Yet, among the private higher education institutions, you have at the top about 14 private universities which are ranked among the top 50 institutions ranked by the Ministry of Education of India. So 14 out of 50 are private owned. That includes some of these high quality medical colleges, such as the Christian Medical College of Vellore, Kasturba Medical College of Manipal. You may have heard of some of these institutions, but they coexist with some fairly lower quality private medical colleges at the other end of the spectrum. So there is a certain degree of disparity among them, which is a matter they will obviously have to focus on. Let's look at Malaysia, which has gone a few steps further. They have introduced Private Higher Education Institution Act in 1996. Before that, at one time, they only had the University of Malaya, and then a few other state universities were introduced. But it is with this Private Higher Education Institution Act of 1996 that conferred degree awarding status to private HEIs that resulted in rapid growth in private sector participation in the higher education sector. So they started with twinning arrangements between local and foreign universities, moved on to credit transfer programs. Today, Malaysia has 54 private universities as against 20 public universities, in addition to branch campuses of foreign universities. Another 50 degree awarding private higher education institutions are there, such as university colleges, and over 300 colleges that can't offer own degrees, but they can offer degrees through partner institutions. So where have they gone with their gross enrollment ratio? They have reached 43% today. And they have evolved into a center for branch campuses of foreign universities, with 14 branch campuses of international universities of very high standing. Those of a much higher standing than the kind of foreign institutions that we have been able to so far attract to Sri Lanka. And these include Monash and Curtin from Australia, Nottingham, Reading, Hull, Newcastle from the UK. And they have created higher education hubs in places like EduCity, Iskandar, and the KL Education City. And they actively promote the entry of foreign students, with over 100,000 international students today studying in Malaysia. It has become an foreign exchange earning activity for Malaysia. And interestingly, Sri Lanka is among the top 10 source countries sending out students to Malaysia. I remember during my student days, we had Malaysian students coming to Sri Lanka to study, because their higher education system was not at that level. But today, we are a significant source of foreign students in Malaysia. So we have to see, where things have not gone right. And all these institutions are regulated by the Ministry of Higher Education, and they have their own quality assurance agency as well. South Korea has more than 400 higher education institutions, 3.3 million students in higher education. Over 80% of these higher education institutions are private, accounting for 85% of student enrollment. They are all regulated by the ministry in charge of higher education. Today, their gross enrollment ratio is one of the highest in the world at 94%. So you can see a definite correlation between the degree of private sector participation and the gross enrollment rate, which is an indicator of access to the higher education system. So something that we need to think about. So let me quickly run through a few recommendations that I would like to share with you. Obviously, the first one is to increase private sector participation, but while ensuring quality. I would stress that our concern with opening up to the private sector has been one of quality, but that is something that these other countries have overcome by having certain mechanisms, such as a common regulatory body, which we can also set up in Sri Lanka, with quality assurance and accreditation functions. So which is a must. We don't need to have separate agencies, one for regulation, one for accreditation, one for quality assurance. We can have one single institution and have these different functions being handled by different divisions of that single body. And it can oversee the implementation of Sri Lanka qualification framework as well. And we must allow the non-state higher education institutions also to use titles such as university or university college, as it has happened in other countries, but provided they meet the stipulated standards, and open all fields of study to non-state higher education institutions. I will continue to say subject to quality assurance and accreditation. So every one of these recommendations is subject to that, because we have to maintain quality. There's no question about that, but there is a way that it can be done. And also we can encourage the private sector, particularly those in certain sectors of the economy, like the IT companies, to invest in IT education, the healthcare companies, such as the private hospitals, to take a lead in investing in medical and health services education, and so on. And the government can support these investments by providing land on long-term lease, because land is one of the most important inputs that are required, and that can definitely bring down the cost of investment, particularly to the non-profit sector. And of course, in return, the government should mandate a stipulated number of merit and need-based scholarships by these institutions, so that you have a mix of students, fee-paying students, as well as those who are gaining admission through these scholarships, and also to widen the coverage of the student loan scheme, which is already in existence. We need to provide greater autonomy to the public sector universities. That is also very important, so that our public sector universities can further develop. And one of my recommendations is to allow the retention of a fixed proportion of internally generated funds, whatever you generate through your postgraduate programs, other fee-levying programs, consultancies, etc. Today, what I understand is that goes into the budget, into revenue expenses, so that the government is able to reduce the grant they provide from government, from the treasury. But instead of that, at least if a certain proportion can be held within the university for its own development purposes, I think that will greatly benefit the university system. And at the same time, the updating of curricula, I don't see why each time it has to go to UGC for approval. I think that kind of thing should be left to the universities, subject to their own guidelines. And collaboration between faculties and departments is something I think within the universities that needs to be promoted, so that it becomes easier for students to study different subjects from different disciplines, which is the trend today that is evident in the rest of the world, and also to make it easier for students to transfer between different faculties and departments. So this requires synchronization of the academic calendars and also an interfaculty credit transfer system. We need to promote research and innovation. I don't want to say a lot about that, since the Vice Chancellor dealt with that topic in great detail, and I'm very impressed with what is happening at the University of Sri Jawaharlal. But what is important is to take this across to the rest of the university system, which is obviously not at the level where you are. And in order to do that, I think we should also make research funding available to the non-state higher education institutions as well, and allow them also to compete on equal terms for that available funding. And to improve the employability of students, of graduates, expansion of the curriculum to introduce more IT courses, more management courses, use of modern IT tools and applications that are relevant to each subject, introduction of learner-centered teaching, switching to modern assessment methods, obtaining industry inputs for curriculum review and revision, widening industry placements for students such as internships, and allowing students to select courses from diverse disciplines, all of which I feel are happening to some extent today, but needs to widen, needs to expand a lot more. And in order to address the brain drain, there are many remedial actions that can be taken. In fact, at an oration I gave at the Ceylon College of Physicians inauguration, where maybe some of you were present, I dealt with this topic in detail. It is in the last CCP journal, if anybody likes to read that article, where I have talked about some of the techniques such as return migration, inward migration, and brain circulation that can be used to deal with this issue of brain drain. I will not go into that in detail in the interest of time. Also, we need to invest in the university physical infrastructure, particularly aspects relating to student welfare, and they are not going to cost billions of rupees to upgrade the hostels, the canteens, the recreational facilities. These things need more investment, and I think the government can easily do that, and also get the private sector involved as well through public-private partnerships. Enhancing the use of technology to move towards blended learning, which is today the primary mode of curriculum delivery across the university system in the world, and to improve collaboration between higher educational institutions and other stakeholders. There are some initiatives such as what is called CART, which is the Chamber Academia Roundtable, and the University Business Linkage Cells, which are all very good initiatives but need to be promoted a lot more. We need your participation in these forums so that there is greater interaction between the academia and the private sector. And last but not least, I think we need to also remember and foster the wider role of universities as centers for intellectual development and critical thinking. We cannot lose sight of that. Of course, I have dealt with the purpose of turning out employable graduates to the economy, but there is one purpose for which we have universities. There is another purpose as well, and that is something I know. I have my good friend, Professor Panduka Karunanayaka at the back here. He has written a lot on this subject. There are many people who feel we should not lose sight of this role as well, which is the wider role of universities as centers for intellectual development and critical thinking. So we need to protect that, but at the same time address other issues to make the learning more relevant to the needs of the economy and society. So with that, I hope I have given some thoughts for you to consider in taking the higher education sector forward. Maybe you may not agree with all of them. Perhaps some may agree with some and some may agree with the others. But I hope I have given you something to think about. And I wish the conference all success. Thank you very much.